It's crazy how quickly things can change. One moment, life seems normal, and the next, it's like the ground disappears beneath your feet. I remember that day all too well. I was just sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, trying to find something to watch after a long day at work. Sarah, my wife, was in the kitchen, tapping away on her phone. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. She's always been glued to that thing. But something was different this time. She was laughing at something, a quiet little chuckle that sounded too intimate. I glanced over and she quickly put her phone down, acting like she was just scrolling through social media or something. But I knew that laugh. It wasn't the kind you have when you see a funny meme. It was the kind of laugh you have when you're flirting. I tried to brush it off. We've been married for 7 years, and I never had a reason to doubt her. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My mind was racing, filled with doubts I didn't want to acknowledge. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, but the thought wouldn't let go. The next day, when she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I would. I checked her phone. I didn't have to dig deep. The first message that popped up on the screen was from someone named Matt. I recognized the name. He was a coworker of hers. They worked together on some project a few months back. I didn't think much of him at the time. He seemed like an okay guy. But reading those messages, it felt like someone punched me in the gut. It started off innocent enough, just some work-related stuff, but then it got more personal. Compliments about how she looked at the office, how much fun they had working late. Then it got worse. They were planning to meet up, and not just for coffee. The more I read, the more my blood boiled. There were messages where he was describing what he wanted to do to her, and she was eating it up, responding in ways I never thought she would. It was explicit enough to make me sick, but I couldn't stop reading. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Horrible, but I couldn't look away. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the screen, but it felt like forever. My hands were shaking and my mind was racing with 1,000 different thoughts. Anger, disbelief, sadness, it all hit me at once. How could she do this to me? To us. I could hear her humming in the shower, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire world was about to come crashing down. Part of me wanted to storm in there, throw the phone at her, and demand an explanation, but another part of me just wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. Instead, I put the phone back exactly where I found it and walked out of the house. I needed to clear my head, figure out what the hell I was going to do. I drove around for a while, no destination in mind, just trying to make sense of it all. I kept replaying the messages in my head, wondering how long this had been going on and what I had done to deserve this. By the time I got back home, Sarah was already in bed, asleep like nothing had happened. I stood there for a while, just watching her, trying to decide if I should wake her up and confront her right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed a plan. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were those messages. And every time I tried to drift off, my mind would yank me back to the nightmare I had just discovered. By morning, I was running on fumes, but I was determined to get to the bottom of this. The first thing I did was dig deeper. I went through Sarah's phone again, trying to piece together a timeline of her conversations with Matt. I found that they were planning to meet up at a motel on Friday night. I had a feeling that this wasn't just an innocent get-together. From the way they talked, it was clear that this was going to be more than just a casual meeting. I decided that if I was going to confront her, I needed to be absolutely sure. I wanted to catch them red-handed. So I marked the date on my calendar and made sure to keep my plans secret. I didn't want to give her any reason to be suspicious. Friday came quicker than I expected. All day, I was a bundle of nerves, trying to focus on work while my mind kept drifting back to the evening ahead. I made up some excuse to leave the office early, saying I had a dentist appointment. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. When I got home, I pretended like everything was normal. Sarah was getting ready for her evening out, and I acted like I was completely clueless about what was actually going to happen. I told her to have a good time and gave her a kiss as she headed out the door. It felt like a sick joke, playing the loving husband while knowing exactly what she was up to. Once she was gone, I grabbed my car keys and headed out. I didn't want to follow her too closely. I didn't want her to catch on. Instead, I gave her a head start and followed her at a distance, making sure to stay out of sight. It was a game of cat and mouse, and right now, I was the cat. I kept a close eye on her car, watching as she drove to the outskirts of town. The motel wasn't far from where she worked, and it was a place I'd passed by 100 times. It was one of those places that people knew about but rarely talked about. As we approached, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The realization that this was really happening hit me hard. I parked a few blocks away, making sure I was far enough to avoid suspicion, but close enough to keep an eye on things. From my vantage point, I could see the entrance to the motel. I watched as Sarah's car pulled into the parking lot, and I saw her get out and walk toward the main office. I tried to steady my breathing, but it was impossible. After a few minutes, Matt's car arrived. He got out and walked toward the same office. They didn't see each other, but it was clear they were both heading to the same place. My heart pounded as I watched them check in, and then, finally, they disappeared into one of the rooms. I waited for what felt like an eternity, just trying to gather the strength to go confront them. Part of me wanted to turn around and drive away, forget about the whole thing, but I knew I couldn't do that. I needed to see this through. I needed to hear the truth from them, no matter how much it hurt. Finally, I gathered my courage and approached the motel. I took a deep breath and walked into the lobby, trying to keep my composure. The receptionist gave me a curious look, but I didn't pay much attention. I asked for the room number, but I didn't have to pretend to be anyone else. I already knew where they were. I walked down the dimly lit hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. I stopped in front of the room where Sarah and Matt were supposed to be. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock on the door. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to do something. This was the moment I'd been dreading, but I couldn't back out now. I knocked on the door. The knock on the door echoed in the small motel room. For a moment, there was silence. I held my breath, every nerve in my body on edge. Then I heard movement from inside, shuffling feet, a muffled voice. I could almost feel Sarah's confusion and Matt's nervousness as they exchanged whispers. The door creaked open, and there they were. Sarah, looking shocked and pale, and Matt, wearing an expression of panic that matched my own. The sight of them together, caught off guard and awkwardly fumbling for words, only fueled the rage that had been simmering inside me. Adam? What? Sarah started, but I cut her off before she could say anything else. I want to know what's going on here, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I've seen the messages. I know everything. Sarah's face turned an even paler shade, and she glanced at Matt, who seemed to shrink back from the confrontation. There was no denying it now. They were caught. Matt opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. I could see the fear in his eyes. I didn't want to give him a chance to dodge the issue. I took a step closer, feeling my anger rise. Adam, please, just let me explain, Sarah pleaded. This isn't what it looks like. I shook my head, unable to contain my frustration. Explain what, Sarah? How you've been lying to me? How you've been seeing someone else behind my back? She looked away, tears welling up in her eyes. It just happened. We didn't plan for it. I'm so sorry, Adam. I never meant to hurt you. Her apology did nothing to ease the pain I felt. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make her understand how betrayed I felt. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the realization that no amount of words could undo what had been done. Matt took a step forward, trying to defend himself. Look, man, I never meant for things to get this far. It was a mistake. We both know that. A mistake. That was the excuse he was going with. I could see the anger in his eyes, too, but it only made me more determined. I wasn't going to let him off easy. You're right, it was a mistake, I said, my voice cold. But it's a mistake that has consequences. Before I knew it, I was closing the distance between us, my fists clenched. I didn't think about the consequences or the repercussions. All I could think about was the betrayal and how much I wanted to address it. I took a swing, and it connected. Matt stumbled back, clutching his jaw. The look of shock on his face was almost satisfying. I didn't stop there. I landed a few more punches, each one fueled by the anger and hurt that had been building up inside me. Sarah tried to intervene, but I pushed her aside. She wasn't the one I was mad at right now. Matt was, and he was facing the consequences of his actions. The confrontation didn't last long. Matt was out of breath and hurt, his resolve gone. I stood over him, breathing heavily, my knuckles sore. I looked at Sarah, who was crying and pleading for me to stop. "Get out," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Both of you. Get out of my life." They didn't argue. They knew there was no point. Sarah helped Matt to his feet, and they shuffled out of the room, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my marriage. As I watched them leave, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The confrontation was over, but the pain was just beginning. I was left standing in that dingy motel room, trying to process everything that had happened. My life had been turned upside down, and I had no idea where to go from here. But one thing was clear: I was done with Sarah. I was done with the lies, the deceit, and the betrayal. It was over. I knew that moving on wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to find a way to heal and start anew. It was time for me to put the past behind me and look toward the future, no matter how uncertain it seemed. I left the motel and drove home in silence, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. I knew the road ahead would be tough, but I was ready to face it. I had been through the worst of it, and now it was time to rebuild and reclaim my life.